Southwell, joined by Bundesliga expert Dan O'Hagan to talk all things Josh Sargent, Norwich City's latest arrival from Werder Bremen, their second arrival from Werder Bremen this summer, of course, after Milo Rashica. Dan, first and foremost, Josh Sargent, right? Got his name wrong right at the start. That's a good start. Talk to me a little bit about him as a footballer. I think there's been a lot of things in kind of the last, since this had really advanced on Friday, and people have read into him about him being a hard worker. People maybe looking at his goal record and not being too impressed. Talk to us a little bit about him as a player.
Yeah, player who is nowhere near the finished article yet. He is a work in progress. Came to Bremen from the USA, where he was prolific in youth football. Did great things in Werder Bremen's reserve team in the regional leagues, and then got his break in the Bundesliga. I think he scored with his first touch in the Bundesliga on his debut, which was remarkable. You mentioned that his goals record isn't the best. I think 11 goals in 70 in the Bundesliga, which, isn't prolific by any stretch. But as I say, a work in progress. His work rate is phenomenal. A real team player. The former coach, Florian Kohfeldt at Bremen, almost made him the first name on the team sheet last year because of that incredible team-mindedness and work ethic. So Norwich are getting a player who has, 2-3 years of playing as a first choice in a major European league. And I think in terms of where he fits into Norwich's squad system, I'd put him somewhere between Teemu Pukki and Adam Idar. Pukki, we know, is the recognised seasoned first choice, first team striker. Adam Idar has got great potential, but is nowhere near, I think, ready to be a Premier League starter. So I think Sargent's there for the occasions when Pukki is tired, or maybe if he's out for 2, 3, 4 games. You wouldn't want to put Idar in as a starter yet for any length of time. Sargent, maybe you could do. So I think he fits in as a number 2 striker. He's seasoned. He's been around the Bundesliga now for, as I say, a number of seasons. So comes in, and at the price they've paid, I think it's a fairly, in the modern day, fairly reasonable fee. And I think he comes in and brings Norwich a lot to that squad they don't maybe have at the moment.
Well, that was going to be my next question. You mentioned the goals record, and that's the thing, isn't it? When any team is linked with a striker, that supporters' eyes is immediately drawn to how many goals he scored. And you mentioned the fee. The reality is, if he would have maybe, and you said there's a lot of work to do, if he maybe hit those heights, it'd probably be worth a significant amount more than he is currently. So there's always going to be an element of rawness just because of perhaps the market the Norwich City shop in. But there's obviously been kind of contrasting views. Some people saying, well, his goal scoring maybe is the result of, or lack of goal scoring rather, is a result of playing in a relatively underperforming, poor Werder Bremen side that didn't create a lot of chances. Other people are kind of putting that down to him maybe a little bit. Certainly that's been the view of some of the United States fans talking in terms of an international level. Where do you kind of see it? Why is his goal scoring maybe not up to the level of, I don't know, let's say a Teemu Pukki, but you could fill in other Bundesliga strikers there?
Yeah, I think Sargent came into a Bremen team who were struggling even 3 or 4 years ago. That relegation last season didn't come out of the blue. It was on the cards for a number of years. So he's never played really at the top level in a really good team. So it's maybe unfair to judge that goals record, given he's not played in a team that's been really firing at Werder Bremen. So maybe in a better team where there's more service forthcoming. He obviously knows Rashica from their time at Bremen together, but hasn't played with the other guys at Norwich yet. So, yeah, we'll see how he gets on. I wouldn't read too much into that goals record just yet. There is a player there. Trust me, there is a player in Josh Sargent. And give him, time, because he's a young 21. He's not 22 until, I think, the end of February. So he's a relatively, at the top level, inexperienced player. I think he's got 5 goals in 13, 14 caps for the USA national team. So that's a good return at that level as well. So don't read too much into that lack of goals at club level yet. He maybe hasn't found the right club or the right system yet to suit his undoubted, qualities that he does possess.
I've seen a few people since this move was confirmed, again, mainly from the US side, where he is very highly rated, isn't he, amongst kind of American supporters, say, well, okay, this move's all very well and good, and he's moving to the Premier League, and that's all positive, but essentially he's swapped one campaign where it's ended in relegation and numerous relegation battles for another one when perhaps he could have stayed in the Bundesliga too, scored lots of goals in the side that may well end up winning lots of games. He's already got 2 this season, hasn't he, for Bremen? So kind of talk to us a little bit about maybe how you see this move panning out from his perspective, and why he's maybe took that decision to move to Norwich in the Premier League. We know, obviously, amongst any players who play abroad, really the Premier League is viewed by a lot of them as the best league in the world. But in terms of sort of swapping clubs for clubs, I guess it's similar to Rashica. But are you surprised maybe that he's taken that decision?
No, I think obviously there's the language thing as well to play in England. He's given Werder Bremen, I think, 4 or 5 years of good service. And I think, we saw the way that club was going last season. It was on the cards for a while that they were going to get relegated. And yeah, he's made the move to Norwich at a good age, a young age, to have a go at the Premier League. And I just think this is a signing which maybe will bear fruit. Maybe not this year, but maybe next season or the season after that, because, Sargent is only 21. He's a player on that learning curve still at the highest level, certainly. But we know Norwich have got this record now of finding players in the European leagues who they can polish. Obviously, the one in point is Emi Buendia. So maybe Weber has seen in Sargent here a player of potential for the future. And I wouldn't maybe expect great things in the coming season, where I think he will be, number 2 to Teemu Pukki. But maybe the year after that, he'll kick on and will, really fulfill that undoubted potential that he's shown in Germany.
You've spoken about him being one of the first names on the team sheet at Bremen last season. He also played sort of out wide on the right, didn't he? I think he's played on the left on occasion. He's also played as a number 10. Interestingly, in Daniel Farke's quotes, he described him as a player that can play sort of a range of positions. So is there, I know we've kind of spoken a lot about moulding him. Is there the potential for Daniel Farke to, I guess similarly to what he's done with Ida at times, maybe look at him on the wing and maybe look to utilise him that way? Or do you see him solely as kind of a centre striker? Where do you think he can kind of play elsewhere? Do you think that's possible that he can play kind of multiple positions?
Oh yeah, I think you look at the modern footballer these days, and very few are kind of nailed to one position at that age, especially. Sargent in a poor Bremen team did show he could play, as you mentioned there, a whole range of different roles in the team, and I'm sure that was attractive to Norwich as well, that he can maybe fill one gap in that squad more than just the one. So yeah, I think certainly, as I say, you're buying there Norwich a player of potential and one they can mould and maybe shape into a really high grade footballer in the coming seasons. But I think for the price Norwich have got Josh Sargent for, they've got a lot of footballer for that money, if you like. Yeah, I would really urge people to look beyond the goals and look at his all-round play and his combination with teammates and the way he brings others into the game. And he's not just a centre forward. There's a lot more to his game than that.
What's the Bremen view of Norwich City at the moment? I would imagine, given they've taken Rashica and Sargent, maybe it's not a club that they look at particularly positively. Although maybe, as you say, those players have potentially come to the end of their journey with the club.
I think Bremen had to balance the books. They were a club really hit very hard by the whole COVID-19 situation in terms of obviously the loss of revenue through the gates. And they had to sell to balance the books. So to sell Rashica and to sell Sargent now on to Norwich for good money, I think for them it made sense as well. They're trying to reshape the club, reshape the squad to bounce back to the Bundesliga. It's their first season in the second tier for 40 years. So for them, it's a massive upheaval. And their first target, first and foremost, is to bounce back, but also to make sure the club bounces back in a healthy state in terms of finance to compete at the top level next season, they hope. So I don't think there'll be too many hard feelings about the players they've moved on or to Norwich especially, because that was a club that really had to, I think, really find its feet again and get the thing onto an even keel after, 18 months of financial turmoil.
How big a loss is Josh Sargent for them at the moment? I know we kind of had the quotes, didn't we, from their sporting director about how they were relatively confident of keeping him before obviously this maybe moved on at the back end of last week. He's already scored 2 goals this season. It seems like he was a big part of their plans for sort of their upcoming campaign and that rebuilding job that you've kind of outlined there.
Well, he was, but I'm pretty sure Bremen, they're no mugs. They will have realised they had in Rashica and Sargent saleable assets. And they will have factored in that the chances were he was going to move on, and they weren't going to have him for the bulk of their second division campaign in Germany. So I'm pretty sure Bremen will have realised this could have happened, and I'm sure they will have a plan B up their sleeves now to ensure he's not missed by Werder Bremen too much.
Yeah, we saw when Sargent was unveiled, Milo Rashica was involved in that announcement, wasn't he? Posting on his various social media accounts. How I guess what Norwich fans will want to know is how good have those two been in terms of linking up and in attacking phases? Have they played a lot together? Is that been a relatively sort of consistent stream of attacking output for Bremen in recent seasons?
Yeah, it has. And what I'd say as well about the relegation was it wasn't the attack which was the problem. You know, Rashid, Sargent, they all played their part. Their issue has been for 5, 6, oh, well, a decade really, defensively. I think they'd let in over 60 goals in maybe 7 of the last 10 seasons before last year. So defensively, Werder Bremen have been awful for a long time, and that was why they went down. Going forward, you know, Rashid and Sargent were impressive. We mentioned obviously Sargent's lack of goals. Rashica last year struggled with goals as well until the last few rounds of the Bundesliga. But the years before that, both were very good. So I wouldn't, as a Norwich fan, be too upset or worried that they'd come from a team that had gone down. The relegation was in no way down to Josh Sargent or Milot Rashica. So yeah, we often talk about players who have been scarred or tainted by relegation at previous clubs. I wouldn't say that's the case here because, you know, relatively compared to their defenders, the attackers weren't the issue at Bremen last season.
His Bundesliga journey has been incredible, hasn't it? I mean, you mentioned that debut with his first debut goal with his first touch for Bremen in 2018. I'm sure in Germany it feels like he's been around for quite a while, even though he's 21. Talk to us a little bit about his progression at Werder Bremen, and I know you mentioned there he scored a lot of goals for their sort of second team, didn't he, before going into the first team? Since he's been in the first team, how has his role sort of changed and developed within that sort of Bremen team?
Yeah, when he first came in, obviously he was, you know, a kid. He was extremely raw. But when he made those cameos from the bench, you could sense that there was a spark about him. You could sense when he came on, he could light a game up. I remember seeing him play in a game, I think at Leipzig, towards the end of maybe 2018. And you could see even then that there was a player in Josh Sargent. I think he may even have scored in that game as well. But certainly it didn't help playing in a poor, underperforming Bremen team. But as the seasons went on, you could see he filled out physically and had more presence on the field. And as I say, last year, the coach Korfeld, I think in pre-season, almost said that, you know, look, my team is going to be built around Josh Sargent in the attacking sense anyway. And I think for a player to have the backing of your coach at that age to say, yep, you're going to be my main number 9 for the coming season, will have done Sargent's own personal development the world of good. And okay, the season ended in relegation last year, but I think to have had a season where your coach has made you the kind of focal point of the team at what 2021 as he was back then last season, a year ago in the Bundesliga, that would have done the player a lot of good. So I think Norwich are getting a player who is used to first team football at a good level, despite the lack of years relatively. And to play 70 games in the Bundesliga by the age of 21, not many do that. So I think Norwich have got themselves a player there who is, for his age, fairly streetwise at a high level. And as I've said before, I think the goals will come. Before that, though, I think the link-up play will come as well. And I think you're going to see with Sargent a good all-round game and not just, you know, an old-fashioned number 9.
It's interesting what you say there about him as a player. You've obviously seen Norwich a few times in this pre-season. You know how Daniel Farke likes to play. What is it about Josh Sargent that you think they will have seen that they feel they can kind of utilise in their team? Where do you kind of see him fitting into this current crop in terms of how Daniel Farke wants to attack the Premier League?
I think he's, as I say, a modern footballer. He's come from the US. He's been well schooled in Werder Bremen's youth team, then the reserve team. So he's very much at home with that kind of German football mentality, which of course we know Daniel Farke has with these Norwich players. Technically, Sargent's pretty good. He's not the greatest, but he's, you know, very technically adept. And I just think he'll fit in. You know, he'll be a very good squad player at Norwich from the get-go. I've said before that I don't think he'll ever trouble Teemu Pukki to be the main choice if Norwich are going to play with one up top. But I think certainly as a good plan B from the bench, I think Sargent has a lot to offer.
Do you think there's a good opportunity as we kind of look ahead to that game against Liverpool on Saturday? Teemu Pukki is obviously, as Daniel Farke said, has lost a bit of muscle mass from kind of coronavirus isolation. He's obviously not played a huge amount of games in pre-season. You obviously saw the only goal that he did score against Huddersfield. does it feel like, well, potentially Sargent's coming in, having played 2 league games, probably maybe even the fittest striker that they have available to them at the moment? Do you think there'll be an opportunity for him this weekend to showcase his ability? I mean, it looks like he'll definitely be in the squad just through sort of the lack of numbers that Norwich City have.
Yeah, maybe. It's a good point that obviously he's played first team football already now, 2 games and 2 goals in the second Bundesliga already this season. So it does come in with a sharpness. Didn't obviously have, the pre-season Norwich have had. I think Sargent is an option for Liverpool, certainly. To give him a start, I think would be a big ask. That first game of the season. I'd be surprised if Pukki wasn't the player to lead the line. But don't be surprised if maybe after an hour or so, Pukki comes off and on comes Sargent. So, he'll be game ready. He'll be match ready. And obviously a player keen to make an impact and prove a point.
Interesting stuff. I'll ask you a couple of questions now in terms of Norwich City and their preparation for the Premier League. You've obviously seen them a few times in pre-season. What do you kind of make of how they're shaping up at the moment? Do you feel they're heading in a lot more? Obviously, the coronavirus kind of outbreak within the club has maybe left them with a bit of a disjointed pre-season. But do you feel altogether both the squad and their plans are maybe in a better shape than they were 2 years ago heading into this league?
Yeah, I think I'd say as well, the recruitment's been very good so far. I think it's been a very good window from Stuart Webber. So I think that combined with a good pre-season, I saw the games against Kings Lynn and against Huddersfield. Kings Lynn was very early on and, players still playing for fitness and what have you. But I thought Andrew Omabamadele, in both games I saw, you can see there a player who, even in the space of 12 months, has grown up massively. And I'd have no great qualms about him now being, almost a first choice in that defensive line. I do think maybe they need some cover in case that doesn't quite work out and to take the heat off him a bit. So I would like to see Norwich maybe sign one more centre-back to compete with the players already there. But as for the general pre-season, I think it's looked pretty good. Okay, Newcastle was, in result terms at the weekend, a bit of a setback. But results in pre-season, ignore them. I think they're in good shape. I mean, I've seen Norwich for 20-odd years now in a professional capacity. And I think of previous pre-Premier League pre-seasons. I don't recall them going into a top-flight season, maybe with the exception of the Paul Lambert pre-season, in as good shape as this. I think the recruitment should really enthuse and encourage. Of course, you look at the fixtures to start with, and they are, let's be honest, quite scary. But get them out of the way. Good performances in those first few matches. Then the games begin to maybe ease up a little bit in terms of opposition. And I think they are in a good place and a good shape. And let's hope they can give a good account this time.
You're maybe a good person to ask this question in terms of how newly promoted teams find it in both the Bundesliga and the Premier League. Is there a similar kind of performance level do you find promoted teams in the Bundesliga tend to do better than those in the Premier League? Obviously there's a lot more money in the Premier League. How do you kind of compare the two in terms of looking at it from a newly promoted team entering the league with their survival prospects?
Yeah, I mean, I think both leagues are fairly similar now in that there are various kind of almost subdivisions within divisions, and Norwich's first goal is to compete with the teams in that bottom rung. As was the case last year in the German league with teams like Stuttgart and Bielefeld, both of whom survived, with room to spare in the end. So you look at Norwich in the Premier League, there are players there, obviously, who were there 2 years ago who've been there and done this. Players like Rashid Sargent now have been scarred with relegation at Bremen last year, and obviously want to avoid a back-to-back relegation. So I just think Norwich are in a good position. I look at the Premier League now, and yes, there are some very good teams, but there's also quite a lot of fairly mediocre teams now in that division. So Norwich, I don't think have much to fear beyond the kind of super clubs in the top 4, top 5. And as long as they can compete and are a bit more, defensively worldly wise and savvy as they compared to 2 years ago, then I think they can give this, a fairly good crack.
I want to ask you just finally a question on Lucas Rupp very quickly. Is it a player with loads of Bundesliga experience, play for a lot of teams at that level? Do you see him, and obviously when he arrived at Norwich, you kind of was used to fill holes, wasn't he? We saw him on the right quite a lot. I didn't see much from him in central midfield until they got relegated. Do you feel he's a player that's maybe not been forgotten about, but maybe underlooked by Norwich fans slightly in terms of how important he could be to any sort of survival campaign this year?
Yeah, and I must say in pre-season he looked very good as well. He's a very experienced, very kind of calming influence in that midfield area. And I don't see any reason why he wouldn't have a bigger part to play this season than maybe in his previous years at Norwich, because I think a fully fit Lucas Rupp is a player who can certainly contribute to a top flight team, plenty across a season. So, yeah, I wouldn't write off Rupp as a Norwich player. I think there is obviously a very experienced, very knowledgeable player at the top level in Germany. And yeah, he could well be for Norwich in the coming months a player who almost comes out of the pack to be one of Daniel Farke's most important.
Lovely stuff, Dan. Thank you very much for that insight. I really appreciate it. Of course, most Norwich fans are aware of you, but we'll leave all of your relevant links down below so they can follow you and check out your work. Have you got a game in the Bundesliga this weekend? I'm trying to rack my brains in terms of when it starts, so maybe you'll be able to prompt me. What's your first sort of game or next game?
Yeah, Saturday it is Union Berlin against Leverkusen. This year we are live on Sky Sports. We've moved over from BT, so that's where we can watch the Bundesliga in the UK this season.
There we go. I'm sure plenty of people will be watching that, particularly as it's a very well, Norwich like to shop there, don't they? So who knows? You could be watching Norwich Stars in the future. Dan, thank you very much. Thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you again very, very soon.